Welcome back to this mini video series on quadratic equations. In this video we're going to look at three methods of solving this quadratic equation, and those methods are going to be trial and error, factorising and using the quadratic formula. So we'll start off with the trial and error approach. So this, in principle, is the simplest, but it's also the least efficient and also the least good, I suppose, is the best way to say this. And this is because as these coefficients become more complex, the trial and error approach doesn't always give the exact solutions. So when I say solutions, what we're looking for are values of x which satisfy this equation being equal to 0. So when we solve an equation, we set y is equal to 0. And therefore, the equation will become x squared plus 5x minus 6 is equal to 0. So we're looking for values that when we plug them in for x, we get the value of 0. So we could just start picking out random numbers. We could pick out 0, for instance, and if we put in 0, we end up with 0 plus 0 minus 6 equals, obviously, does not equal 0. So what this means is we have to just try and guess an initial starting value. There is a trick we can use to try and improve where our guesses is, which is we make a plot or a sketch of this graph. So we can start off with the graph. We know it's going to be U-shaped. We put some values on here, so 2, minus 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4, minus 5, and we just start plotting them on here. So let's say we start off with that 0, we end up with minus 6, let's say it's there. We can plug 1 in, so we're going to have 1 plus 5 is 6, minus 6 is equal to 0. So that actually is a solution. So 1 is a solution. So we found one of them just by guessing. We can also try putting minus 1 in. So we're going to have minus 1 times minus 1, which is 1, minus 5, which goes to minus 4, minus 6 is minus 10, which is going to be all the way down here somewhere. We could try another number. Let's try 5, for instance. 5 times 5 is 25. Plus 5 times minus 5, which is minus 25, so that's 0. Minus 6. So if this time, when we try 5, we end up with our minus 6. So you can see that our graph is going to go down to some value. We don't quite know where it finishes, and then we're going to start coming back up again. So we can try and find our other solution by guessing values on this side of the graph. So we can, as we know minus 5 isn't a solution, we could try something, say, like minus 6. So we could do minus 6 squared, which is 36, plus 5 times minus 6, which is 30. So we're down to 36 minus 30 is equal to 6. Minus 6 is equal to 0. So we have found our solutions are equal to minus 6 and 1. And we can trial these. So if we just put these into this equation, so let's try minus 6 all squared plus 5 times minus 6 minus 6. What's this equal to? So this is 36 minus 30 minus 6, which is 0. So we can test that as a solution. We can also do the same for 1. So in this case, we just use the graph to supplement our trial and error approach. But sometimes these values are going to be so far apart from each other, or the graph is going to be so big that you can't actually trial it. In which case we have to use a different method, one which gives a more a faster way of finding the answer. Also, bear in mind, say that these were given a solution of say 6.1, trying to find that would become much more difficult using the trial and error method. So in this case we're going to use a method now called factorising. So I'll make another video where I'll actually go through the process of factorising and what factorising is. But for a quadratic, what we have to do is effectively put this into 2 brackets. So this is the factored form. So when we have an example like this where we have x times something, the reason why we're putting this into this factored form is because when we have 2 numbers multiplied by each other, if we're trying to make those 2 numbers multiplied equal to 0, one of those numbers has to be 0. There is no other way of multiplying 2 numbers together and coming up with 0 unless one of them is 0. So you'll see why that's important later. So what we're going to do here is, first of all, put an x at the beginning of each bracket. Now we're going to do a little trick to work out what signs we need. So we take the first sign, which is a plus, and we put it in the second bracket. What we do then is look at the second sign. If the second sign was a plus, we put the same sign as we put in the second bracket in the first bracket, so we would put a plus here. But it's not a plus, it's a negative, which means we put the difference sign there. So since we've got a plus in the second bracket, the negatives say there must be a different sign in the first bracket, which means this becomes negative. What we're doing now is we have to find 2 numbers that when multiplied excuse me, make 6, and when taken away from each other, so this sign tells us what happens. If this was a plus, it'll be 2 numbers that when added together, but as we say, it's a negative number here. So when they are minus from each other, make 5. So this comes down to knowing a little bit about the number 6. So we're looking for numbers that multiply together to make 6. So we can have 1 and 6, or we can have 2 and 6. Sorry, 2 and 3. But we also need to have them so they take away from each other to make 5. So that would be the 6 and the 1. And we start off by putting the smallest number in the first bracket and the biggest number in the second bracket. And what we should always be able to do is just check what's coming out. So I'm going to swap pens to the blue pen. So when we multiply brackets out, what we're doing is we first of all take the first term of each bracket and we multiply them together. So we go x times x is x squared. Now I'm going to swap to the green pen and we take the second term in each bracket and multiply that together. So we've got minus 1 times plus 6. So that is minus 6. And now I'm going to swap to the red pen. What we do then is we take the first term in the first bracket and we multiply it by the second term in the second bracket. So plus 6 times x is plus 6x. And we take the second term in the first bracket and we multiply it by the first term in the second bracket. So we've got minus 1 times x is minus 1. We can now just look through this and just check. So we've got x squared. This should be minus 1x, plus 6x minus 1x is minus 5x, and minus 6. So we've got back to our original form, so we have checked against ourselves, and we know that we've factorised this correctly. So now we're ready to find our solutions for x. So remember what I said, that one of these brackets must be equal to 0. So we can say that either x minus 1 is 0, or x plus 6 is 0. This allows us then to rearrange for x. So this one here would give x is equal to plus 1, and this one here would be x is equal to minus 6. So if we go back to or if we remember back to when we solved this by trial and error, we should end up with the same solutions, that x was equal to plus 1 and x was equal to minus 6. So these are our two solutions using the factorisation method. The problem comes with factorisation is what happens if we can't think of two numbers that multiply together to make the constant, and then either add or subtract to make the b coefficient. Or what happens if they are decimal numbers and we can't just think of those off the top of our heads? This is where this method falls down. So in that case, we use something called the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is the most daunting method that I'll show you for solving quadratic equations today, but it's really not too bad. And the reason why it looks daunting is because of the formula itself. So this is the formula, that minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a is equal to x. So first of all, we have to say what the a, b and c are. So this goes back to what our coefficients and constants are. So a is the coefficient in front of the x squared, and in this case a is going to be equal to 1 because the number in front of this x squared is 1. B is the coefficient in front of the x, so in this case it is 5, and c is the constant, which is minus 6. So the important thing to remember here is to also include the signs that come with each coefficient or constant. And then it's a matter of plugging them into this equation. One thing that I would advise, and this will make things much easier for you, is to start off by doing the b squared minus 4ac first. Because if this part under the square root is equal to a minus number, then there are no solutions for this equation. There are no values of x that you could possibly plug into this which would give you 0. Well, at least no real values of x. And that's because you can't take the square root of a negative number and output a real value. You can do an imaginary number, which is called I, but for most people we are looking only at real numbers. Therefore, if this square root or the term under the square root is negative, then there are no solutions and you can stop there. So that's where I'm going to start off. I'm going to start putting in b squared minus 4ac is equal. So b squared is equal to 25. Now we're going to minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 6. So we've got, or minus 6. there. So here we end up with 25. 4 times 1 is 4, times minus 6 is minus 24. We've got a plus outside, so that's going to go to plus 24, which is equal to 7. So equal to 49. Now, this is positive, so we know there must be solutions. We can now plug into the rest. So we're going to start off with minus 5 plus or minus the square root of 49. So this is going to give a nice answer. All over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1, which is 2. So this is going to give, and this is all going to be equal to x. So x is going to have two solutions, or two values, one which is the positive when we do this as a positive, and one when we do this as a negative. So we are going to have minus 5 plus the square root of 49, which is 7, all over 2. So this is going to be equal to minus 5 plus 7 is 2 divided by 2, which is equal to 1. So that's one value of x. And if we go back to the earlier part of this video where we did this by the factorisation or trial and error, this was one of the solutions we came up with. We can also take this, and we're going to have minus 5 minus 7 over 2. So minus 5 minus 7 is minus 12 over 2, which is equal to minus 6, which is also equal to x. So again, this quadratic formula has given out the two answers that we've previously calculated using the factorisation method and the trial and error method. So the big advantage of this formula is no matter what your coefficients were, let's say you had 100 in front of the x squared, 5.2 in front of the x, and your coefficient was 0.000063 or something, you can still use this formula, and there is no way that you could be able to factorise or use a trial and error method on those numbers otherwise. So this is the main advantage of the quadratic formula. It is probably the best method to use if you're trying to work out what your value of x is going to be. The only thing that you have to do is remember what the formula is, but again, in today's age of the internet, we can just look it up by typing the quadratic formula into Google or a search engine of your choice.